Okay, and then let me hit the right button. That is the right button. Ladies and gentlemen and variations thereof, welcome to the Selectives Lorecast, a casual Elder Scrolls podcast. It's been a while. My name is Rotten Deadite. I'm really friggin' sick. I have a head cold like you wouldn't believe. Today we're talking about Talos. With me to help me out to talk about Talos today are...
I am James, also known as Aramithius.
I am John, also known as Sifri.
And I'm Nick. I'm not really known as anything else.
He's Nick, but some people call him Nick. We are... oh, yes. Okay, so today we're talking about Talos, which is second in line, second to the last of the Aedra. After Talos, it's Zenithar, and then we're done with the bastards. Mostly, I mean, we actually technically kind of already discussed Talos in a previous cast a long time ago, because we've been doing this for a while, and we kind of really mostly did a cast about Tiber Septim, but I kind of wanted to discuss Talos from more of the perspective of the god and his placement in the 8 or 9 Aedra, depending on who you ask, and I wanted to kind of talk about, spend a little bit more time talking about the Thalmor and what the why in God's name removing Talos from the pantheon was a good idea, how could it possibly matter, etc. Because I think there's a little bit more to unpack there than we've had a chance to in the past. If you're listening to this podcast, or if you're watching us on Twitch or whatever, you almost certainly know who Talos is, but just in case you don't, this is I'm going to use God in air quotes, who used to be known as Tiber Septim, who Tiber Septim was a very famous imperial general, emperor, ruler, who, air quotes, united all of Tamriel in the respect that, you sort of, murder people who disagree with you, basically. That's a good point, Sith. He's not an Aedra, he's a divine. Which is true. I mean,
we'll get to that. But anyway,
Sorry.
Well, there is of course the argument of if the Aedra are holding up like all of reality, does Talos hold up all of reality? And that's actually a very interesting conversation.
we'll get to that.
Tiber Septim, for a time, a duration, took over the majority, or basically beat the pants off of basically everybody who had a military in Tamriel. He was, to the best of my knowledge, the only person to do this so far, and he did it largely with the assistance of Numidium.
Well, he subdued all of the races of man before Numidium was on the scene.
That's a good point. But that is a good point. But he took over the Somerset Isles and other places with the assistance of Numidium, which is the giant stompy robot that everybody's very familiar with, what's left of the Dwemer. He did this by utilizing the Staff of Magnus, which is the MacGuffin that you end up getting at the end of Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall. So why is Tiber Septim worshipped as a god? The answer is because in the process of commandeering Numidium, and especially in the process of sort of cementing his role as the Emperor of Man, Tiber Septim, it is safe to say, attained a certain level of metaphysical of metaphysical power, I guess we could call it, a certain state of metaphysical divinity, by basically combining his soul with the soul of 2 other people, arguably, depending on how you
Are we
interpret
sure
it. At
about
least
that being
minimum of one.
Yeah.
But in my opinion, and I think it's a good opinion because it's mine, at least possibly two other people, all three of these people, including Tiber Septim, were Shezarines, or reincarnations of Lorcan, Shazar. Again, arguably. And when they when he activated Numidium, my argument would be that that was sort of the I don't want to say the gel or the glue or whatever, but it was definitely sort of the spark that boosted him into a state that would almost certainly be considered to be divinity, obscene levels of power.
I mean, every time Numidium gets turned on, we end up with
all kinds of things break.
Shit hitting the cosmic fan.
Yeah, exactly.
It's dragon breaks, but I'd just like to draw a quick parallel there with Vivek, because Vivek arguably attained his first form of godhood through the use of the tools and everything happening during the red moment, which was I don't know, it involved Numidium. Numidium wasn't really turned on as such, but part of the mechanisms for Numidium were used at that point. So is it, I'm just thinking that given those two commonalities and that they're both involving dragon breaks, if we're looking at a general mechanism for godhood, or to mucking around with the walking ways, or potentially just Chim, now I think about some stuff in Vex teachings, does it just require going and manipulating a dragon break in the process? And if so, that was Talos' first step, because thinking about Vex teaching, the endeavor being a return to the first brush of Anu Padme, that is a dragon break, and that is part of the process of the Sijic endeavor. So are we reading godhood and potentially a good chunk of the walking ways just as something where you need to go back to the dawn?
Yeah, because at the very least, you can kind of, I think, overly simplify things by just sort of, tallying off a checklist. I mean, can you become unbelievably powerful by completing one of the walking ways? Yeah, it seems that way. Okay, so which ones did the Tiber Septim achieve? Mantling.
Yes.
The combination of souls. Check. And a dragon break.
Yes.
Check. So that's the magic number. That's 3.
Yep.
He's 3 souls, 3 walking ways.
It's also said. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's also said that specifically that Tiber Septim became Talos by way of mantling by the fourth. Like the wording is mantling by the way of the fourth. Of course, fourth walking way. If you look specifically at the events that are said to have happened, especially in I know it's a heresy, but the Arcturian heresy, which is I know that's a whole nother kettle of fish, but he is actually in that moment, he is imitating Lorcan because he is collaborated with someone, whether they fully understood or not, to take someone with a divine spirit and shove them in and shove their soul into a trap, and possibly to reach some kind of ascendance, which is what is said that Lorcan was trying to do. You have Zurin as the Magnus-like figure, and then you have Wolfarth. It kind of in this sense taking the place of the gods at that point. So I would argue that when he however he reached godhood after that point, I would argue that is what specifically the thing that most tricks the universe into seeing him as like a myth echo of Lorcan that allows him to step into his unfilled position.
Although I'd almost argue that it's more than Lorcan, because if we're treating Talos as all 3, then
Right.
Talos is both the betrayed and the betrayer and the one who helps the cause. If you look at the heresy, it's not imitating anything that Lorcan specifically did. It's mantling convention, if such a thing can be done, because there's the heart getting ripped out and someone getting betrayed and everything else. It's not. If you're thinking of Talos as a combination of those three, the whole event is encapsulated within the being, which I've seen talked about as Talos as Convention 2.0, which is potentially why the Thalmor want to get him away. If we're going to go on the precise wording of the Alt-Murray commentary on Talos, that if his presence does fortify the wheel of convention, that's because he's imitated the whole of convention rather than just Lorcan.
Okay.
I think. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I'm with you so far. I'm just saying that holds up.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if we want to torture the analogy a little bit more, which is basically just, the subtitle for this podcast, the idea that Talos serves as a second convention, fortifying the wheel. A wheel's most stable when it has, a wheel's on an axle, and an axle's a lot more stable when it's got 2 points.
That's an interesting idea. Yeah. So speaking of the wheel, let's split off of that. What's the why would Talos serve as an additional? So the Aedra. So everybody understands. Assuming you're watching these casts, you probably already got a pretty good idea of the metaphysical structure of the Arbus. So you have a rim with 8 spokes around a central thing, right? The 8 spokes are the Aedra. The central thing is the impossible point within which the real world, the Mundus, exists. So if you remove those 8 spokes, the impossible point cannot exist. It disappears, and the reality or linear time and physical space disappears. So how does Talos serve as an additional spoke? How would that hold up? How would he, if he does, how would he do it?
I'd argue that's because he's the ruling king.
Okay, yeah, but more of that.
Yeah, I know. I was going to elaborate. Sorry. You have a lot. Sorry, you have a lot in the sermons about how there are open spaces that need to be filled, right? Like the through the Triune Gate. Well, I'm not saying it's like the Triune Gate per se, but when Lorcan dies, quote unquote, and he ceases to be, let's just say, sitting at the side of the other gods and whatever myth or story that you want to tell, and that seat is open, that left a spot. Like, he created Nirn to ascend, maybe. That's what I think he did it for. So it's
not to
it's
escape.
A tool. Yeah, it's a tool to step off in a way, and there's only one person that can sit in those shoes, because it was probably a trip for one and maybe two for in a divine marriage, and I think that's kind of how he does it. Is you have this empty space that isn't stable necessarily on its own, and Talos steps in, fills it, and makes it stable, but he refuses to go further. He refuses to leave. And I was reading something the other day in Coda that I thought was really interesting, where he talks about how those who've cut off their hands have refused. Like, they had the arena, but they refused it. So he's in this position, but he decides he wants to make the world stronger because he's too attached to it. Perhaps he doesn't want to leave. He's afraid to. Perhaps like Vivek, he's afraid to make that last leap.
Right. Yeah. Well. Fear's a big part of that. Well, I was going to say, to make sure that we've got all our terminology correct, I think when you say, he's created a universe or a condition from which he can ascend, we're talking about ascending to a point at which he can become the Amaranth or produce the Amaranth. Yes.
Yes.
So When I like to say that Lorcan created Mundus so that he could escape the cycle, a better way to put it would be like you put it. He created a condition for him to be able to ascend to create the escape route. Yeah. So okay. So
although that kind of puts Talos in the same sort of role as Sothasil, not necessarily because Sothasil is concerned about, or in his own words, he can't see the window for the escape from the cell. He can only see the unsteady walls, and is just trying to make things more steady. Talos, if you're taking that sort of analogy with Talos, then Talos probably can see out. In fact, definitely can see out, but is still choosing to stay anyway. It's doing a very similar thing, just making sure that the world stays very, very similar.
Yeah, because
maintaining the escape tunnel for other people.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, you can't create the you can't create the amaranth if the means to ascend dissolves. So yeah, I mean, and I mean, I'm pretty sure, what's it called? Truth in Sequence has some language in it that is very evocative of the amaranth, but it's a little, if I recall correctly, it's a little vague. It's sort of like this was an idea that Sothasil had, but he couldn't quite nail down.
Yeah, it kind of hints at the kind of the only name of God I type stuff, and that side of it, but it doesn't really go beyond. There's some sort of transcendental stuff, and in the final sermon, but that's about it.
Actually, I'm always interested in sort of plugging things that are coming out in ESO because. Yeah. I despite the fact that I almost never play it, I fucking love that game. I love that it exists. Yes. I just adore it. And since they are coming out with the Skyrim expansion, the northwestern portion of Skyrim, and apparently from some I don't know if it was concept art or a screenshot, but a very one-to-one replication of what is it called? What's the name of the city in the
Solitude?
Solitude, yeah. I think I saw in a screenshot or something like that. It looked like a very like Elder Scrolls V reproduction of Solitude in Elder Scrolls Online, which I thought was interesting. But what I'm hoping is that we're going to get a little bit of a teaser of Tiber Septim in Skyrim, because I mean,
yes,
he hasn't happened yet, but I would love to have a little was it the what's Vivek call him, the Red Heart of Conquest or something like that? Yeah.
Oh, flip. Yes. Sorry. Now you say that, going back to the carrying on the thought from the Dark Heart of Skyrim, one of the promo images I saw was that you actually have someone in kind of grayish robes holding a dragon, what looks like a dragon's skull with glowing red eyes. And my thought was immediately, is this something to do with the ascendancy of Tiber Septim, or connected to his eventual ascendancy, or something to do with him? I just thought that the symbols for kind of the imperial throne and that sort of thing were a bit too in your face with that image for it not to be, which ties in a little bit with John's pet theory of the moment about Tiber Septim being a vampire, which we can possibly get to later.
Oh God!
Yeah, it's a really messed up idea. I want to talk about that.
So you've heard?
Yeah, that's a good one.
And it would also fit the timelines, because it would, because that would be one way for him to last all this time.
Well, I mean, it's one of the sort of like general questions I've always sort of had about mages in Elder Scrolls is that they've managed to figure out ways of extending their life. But I mean, we know this from Divithfear and a couple of other very famous Telvanni mages who are more than happy to tell you that they've lived way longer than they're supposed to. But they never really tell you how. And I've always been kind of interested in, like, I always wanted to see if, like, ESO ever, like, you know, addressed that directly about how mages manage to live as long as they do.
Well, there was the one mage in the, God, it's Mr. Stratha, I think, in the Morrowind DLC, where
That sounds familiar.
yeah, she summons a Daedra, and like, oh God, I need to go back and play the Morrowind DLC again.
Okay.
But she summons a Daedra, and it's like she makes a deal with the Daedra that, like, I get to live longer so that I can help basically the Nerevarine.
Oh, really? Okay.
I didn't think it was
Or something like that.
in order to help the Nerevarine, but it was basically she would live until a man killed her, which is why she won't let any men anywhere near Tel Brenora.
Oh, yeah.
In the Elder Scrolls 3.
I loved how they did that in the Morrowind expansion. That was so great. They explained a lot of the crazy shit that you see in Morrowind. I have to say, I especially loved the quest for. I'm sorry for derailing the fuck out of this, but I love the quest
cast
for.
Is a Morrowind cast.
Yeah, every cast is a Morrowind cast. Yeah, when you go in, you go to Scar, and convince the Ashlanders to move out of it, and they're like, "Oh no, don't worry about it. Red Orion will give it back as soon as they're done."
Oops.
Oh man.
Yeah. Ooh, hashtag cringe. Yeah, but I thought I had a lot of fun with that. It was really good.
Anyway, Talos.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's going to be the that's. I think that's a really good explanation of why Talos is as important as he is. And the idea that Talos can act as an additional reinforcing pillar of reality is why the Thalmor wanted to get rid of him as bad. Well, one of the reasons, and they had a lot of good reasons, why the Thalmor wanted to get rid of Talos worship altogether. There's been a lot of back and forth in this community. There's been a lot of back and forth in this cast about whether or not worshiping a god makes it a god or not.
Mm-hmm.
There's been a couple of actual responses from Kirkbride saying that that is not the case. However, I've gone back and found those posts where he responded on the record about this stuff, and it said, and I think what he meant was that's not the case for established deities like the Atata or the Aedra, or the Daedra for that matter. That if you stop worshiping the Aedra, they'll still be gods. But I think that may not necessarily apply to entities that become gods like Talos. Like, yeah. Oh, does anybody want to put anybody out of their misery? Why is he called Talos?
Yep. Okay. Yes. The you're talking the real world stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Talos was a Greek deity that was linked to that was made from what I can remember, and I'm hashing this up so someone else can correct me.
I'm a little fuzzy on it too.
Yeah. Was basically a huge brass god that got made by a particular Greek city, and Talos became a god because Numidium, big brass stompy thing.
Yep.
That's as much of a connection as I can make. I'm sure there's more.
I don't think there's any more to it.
Oh, okay.
And it sounds cool.
Yeah, it sounds cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Giant bronze giant. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but when yeah, Numidium IRL. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, giant stompy robot. That shit's long gone too, which is a shame because it was probably fucking amazing. I mean, I've seen pictures of like artists' renderings of it and stuff, and it looked pretty amazing. I would be absolutely floored if it was at all actually that like physically accurate. Like just being able to build a giant brass object that big and not make it look kind of like squished or fucked up looking would be amazing to me. But I don't know, whatever. So.
Oh, we have something from Dr. Nightstone in chat. Bronze automaton to protect Europa in Crete from invaders.
Not
not really
worshipped.
worshipped as a deity, from what you
Okay.
can tell. Okay.
I'm
Okay.
sure they said that.
But you still found people putting flowers at its feet and stuff every once in a while, I guarantee it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, not giving thanks to a protector feels a bit strange.
Yeah.
But
And also, I mean, was it effective? Well, I mean, it's a giant fucking bronze statue that's straddling a river. I mean,
If the Navy came in, you could just detonate it and surprise.
Well, I mean, if you're, I mean, keep about like, I mean, you're kind of looking at like, I mean, imagine like primitive folk on their ship sailing over from God knows where. Like, let's go get those. That's where them sailors came from. And then they see above the horizon starts to rise this giant bronze like shape. I'd nope the fuck out of there immediately. I don't know what that is, and I don't care. It's time to leave.
yeah.
Fun thing about Talos with like its translation in lore, which is Storm Crown, that's pretty interesting, is it seems to be referring to a certain kind of regality. Not, I don't think so much in the sense of like, you know, Kim or anything, but like it's because you know elm effects, they're like sigils that refer to
Actual magic.
certain sets of like words and meanings and whatnot. With Kim, you have a correlation of starlight. With storms, if you look at King Narrowmore in ESO, and he talks about like colors and like what they mean, things like that. Some dude you fight, he refers to purple as not only the color of regality, obviously, but the color of savage gashes in the night sky. And so there's this correlation there between storms and royalty, and you see it come together again in Storm Crown, which I thought was very interesting. And then, of course, after Martin dies and the Storm Crown interregnum begins, there's a brief period before Titus Meade takes the throne where the White Gold Tower is described as being struck by lightning and surrounded by like a halo of storms almost. And it's interesting that they relate, like obviously it's a metaphor for the Storm Crown. Like the tower is not crowned. It is what it's supposed to be a metaphor for. And I think, which I thought was very interesting, because you think about it, the symbol for Kim is supposed to resemble a crown on a tower. So I thought that there was an interesting correlation there that could probably be explored.
Yeah, it's also I sort of assumed that it had something to do with the association with Kine and being like the anointed of Kinnereth, but
it probably does.
Or just having Wolfarth hanging around your head all the time, depending on which way you want to.
True.
That's true.
That one.
True, he do that. Yeah. So. The idea of the Thalmor attempting to remove the worship of Talos from Skyrim obviously didn't work out all that well. But although I do think it's interesting that, well, no, I won't go into that. So they do have a strong motivation to remove Talos from worship by the general public, and in so doing sort of undermine the ability for Talos to be a pillar of reality, because as we've established before, that is the goal of the Thalmor, is to sort of undo the winding of the dragon. But in the case of Talos, that's harder to do, because what you're with the Aedra, what you're looking at is I guess I would put it as an establishment by actual gods that the elves do not really debate. I mean, I don't think there are elves out there who will debate the formation or the method of creation, but their attempt to undo that is, I mean, they have whatever methods they're taking. But when you have an elf, when you have like a people worshiping an entity that can actually get something done and existed at one point or another, and is definitely like a what am I trying to say here? It's different from if you've basically removing Talos is tougher than removing is something that you have to removing Talos by worship is something you have to get done because of the demonstrable existence of Talos, because he wasn't there and then he was, and then the only way for them, they can't remove the worship of the Aedra because the Aedra are permanent. They're they're not creatures that came along after creation. You might as well try to remove the worship of physics. We're all gonna collectively stop believing in gravity today.
And then we all floated away.
Yeah, but that's not something that they were able to do, obviously. So in the case of what the Thalmor's plan is, obviously their only possible solution is to remove the sort of structural shrines that people have erected instead. Hence their attack on corruption of the towers.
Ish. Although,
yeah,
if we're going to go into that sort of motivation, they haven't gone for Red Mountain or Adamantia demonstrably in war so far. So they didn't go for Balfura as a military objective within the Great War. You'd think they kind of would.
Well, Red they don't have to go for Red Mountain because the heart of Red Mountain is the heart of Lorcan, and that's banished.
No, Adamantia.
Oh, well, yeah.
Now we sit here and do for about 5 minutes.
Yep.
Let that sink in.
Yeah. Trying to fit everything in.
How are they gonna? How would you think they would manage the removal of Adamantia or the corruption of Adamantia? Yep. What was the heart of Adamantia? Do we know? Did we ever get an answer on that?
The Zero Stone. It's some weird void thing that's in the basement that the Dureni ritually went down and tried to tap once in their lifetime, and it generally drove them nuts. Yeah, but yeah. Oh, and Dr. Nightstone, I think we need to make it clear that the claim elves want to unmake creation is not 100% true or clear. It's the common elven mission to return back to the heavens as the gods they once were. That's fair enough. Yeah. For the Altmer, it isn't to unmake it. For your common Somerset Altmer, it's the state of perfection. Yeah, to be perfect is to be God. I can see that. But what? Yeah, and that's possibly another reason as to why why Talos is also so much of an affront to the elves. For an elf to be a god is just to go back to what they once were.
Yeah,
for a man to be a god,
no,
yeah. That's crossing the categories. That's not allowed.
That's a no.
At the very least, when the tribunal did it, they had the common decency of being elves first, and
yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure the Thalmor didn't really enjoy that very much either, because they were just like, look, you can't just be obscenely powerful and call yourself a god. That's ridiculous. Ridiculous. It's stupid. What would you? You guys are silly. It's silly.
Yeah.
So silly.
Well, you've got to be perfect before you become a god. Potentially, if we're that's kind of assuming what we know of Auriel's method of ascension, which isn't an awful lot. I mean, the assumption is Draco Chrysalis generally, but we know very, very little about that.
Yeah.
And that's also making an assumption that, linear time matters to gods.
Yep.
Well, yeah, I mean, we don't really have we don't really have like a good way of like, I get every time that I think I've got an idea of what time is like in the Aetherius, somebody brings up the Magna help me, J?
Magna Gay?
No. J. Just say however you want, man. It's hard to say Magna J.
I like your explanation
It's
for
just
it, though,
hard.
dude. It was really good.
It's like CHIM. Pronounce it how you like.
But I'm gonna try to stick with Magnage. I think it sounds better. The trick with the Magnage is that I read that. Shut up, Doc. I read that document and it sounds very much like there's some kind of like a definitive, separation of event in the Aetherius, and that's kind of like. The other problem I think is that I'm also trying to sort of apply the science of physics, the idea of like an all-encompassing omni-event to the Aetherius may not be a good way of doing things.
Although, in fairness, going in the common order of things, or from some of the books, that Akatosh is the dragon god of time, and time happens once he is formed. He forms in Aetherius, so there is some degree of time and causality within Aetherius itself. It's not total acausal.
Well, that's kind of like another argument of does Akatosh become the dragon god of time? Does he take on that responsibility, or was he already?
And here's where I bring up my favorite quote from the whole of Bethesda Softworks forums, and I can't remember who on earth said it, but which is a pain. But Alduin is the son of Akatosh, the dragon god of time, who has always existed. But Alduin was Akatosh before he always existed. Or sorry, Alduin and Auriel was Akatosh before he always existed. That look means something.
It means I don't know what the fuck that means.
I don't know. It's the idea of being able to retroactively apply stuff in a state where if time is
right,
if time is wobbly, then you can do things that once, therefore forever.
If it's wibbly wobbly, then
yeah. And to kind of bring this back to Talos did not exist before the warp in the West because of the fact that the Underking had not yet ascended to become part of Talos. However, once the warp in the West occurred, Talos had always existed.
Yeah. Right. It was just like after the events of Red Mountain, Vivek or the Tribunal had always been gods.
Yes.
Because every Dragon Break is returned to the convention. So, right.
Yes.
Yeah. So
although you can also argue that it was potentially propaganda as well, because a whole bunch of records in Talos' case were destroyed. If you believe the Arcturian heresy, he did an awful lot of rewriting of history while he was still mortal. And
wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but
Red convention.
Yeah. Oh, so, but I'm just saying the confusion around the potential confusion around what was before and always, or once, therefore always, could kind of half be that that it's just messing around with history, so we don't have the records to know what was before, so we can't actually check what was. So we just extend our present into the back, which possibly happened with the Tribunal, possibly happened with Talos to a degree, and so we take it from there.
Yeah. Well, so let's speculate.
Another subtitle for this podcast.
Yes, let's talk out of our asses about. There is a Lorecon brewing actually. Yeah, let's talk about that for a little bit. Have you guys heard about this?
Yeah,
Elder Scrolls Lore
in the
Convention?
Midwest somewhere.
Is it out west?
I believe it was Milwaukee, but I'd have to look. I'd have to look it up again.
Milwaukee.
I thought it was Minneapolis, but yeah.
Maybe it was.
Maybe.
Oh, it died?
Oh, shame.
Oh.
All right, get your black soul gems.
Well,
We got work to do.
Yeah.
So, actually, back in the IRC days of the Memospore IRC, Kirkbride was trying to get a lore convention together. And I don't remember. I think he wanted to call it something like Anumidicon or something like that. And Daria was like, "We should call it LoreCon. Are you stupid? It should be called LoreCon. Why shouldn't it not be LoreCon?" And he's like, "I don't know. I like Anumidicon better. I just think it." And she's like, "What? What? Why?"
I mean, she's right though.
Yeah,
she's right.
Just because she's right doesn't mean she can't also be wrong.
No, she's 100% right. It should have been called LoreCon. But I mean, he was talking about that because at the time he was living in New Orleans, and they have a lot of convention centers in New Orleans, and they're not nearly as expensive as you think they would be, especially in the off season. So he was like, we could get I just need to know about how many people are going to be there, and I want to make it like really, 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 really bare bones bullshit. Like we're going to rent like one room, and everybody has to behave really, really nicely, and yeah, Arctic. I think lack of organization was definitely part of it. Funding, I think, would have been a huge deal. I think in order to get a lore convention together, you would have to get somebody like Kirkbride to make a public announcement. You'd have to get like a catalyzing agent to get that thing going, because until somebody like semi or reasonably official says something, you're not going to be able to get a whole bunch of people together. So. It noped itself from ever happening.
March on Bethesda's offices.
I don't think I would want an official Bethesda lore convention. I like my lore unofficial and unapproved.
It would be unofficial and unapproved. We would just invade.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, you could, ToddCon. We could hold like a panel at QuakeCon or something like that,
that would be cool.
Yeah, that's certainly possible.
Yeah.
You got hella bullied for trying to do it. So what?
Oh,
that's a shame. That's wrong.
Yeah.
Man. Actually, I remember reading that thread, and I remember there were only a few replies to the post, and I remember thinking, people seem a little hostile about this. Like the overall response was a little testy and kind of like, why? Why would you want to? Who are you? Who the fuck are you to? I'm like, I don't know.
Oh my god!
Yep.
Someone that had access to hotels.
Yeah, that's right. It was somebody who was actually like a convention planner or something.
Yes.
And I was like, I remember
God
thinking
damn
like,
it.
wow, if anybody's going to do it, it's going to be these people. And then,
Yeah. Anyway, Talos.
We could just rent out a Motel 6.
I don't know.
Hell
Yeah.
So if we can rent room 1008, we'll do it. So Talos. So let's speculate. Let's talk. Let's sort of talk out of our ass. What role do you think the worship of Talos, or for that matter, the or the Thalmor are going to play in Elder Scrolls 6?
Well, I'm fairly willing to bet that it wouldn't necessarily be Talos, but it would be something. Would we see some? Given that it's Hammerfell, I'd be inclined to think Hounding before anything else. But that kind of brings in the whole general mannish spirit and such like. So, thinking about Shazar and all those sorts of angles, rather than Talos as such for the Elder Scrolls 6, simply because there's not the cultural resonance with Talos as there was in Skyrim, despite the fact that Talos was an Imperial import who basically usurped Ysmir.
That's a good point. The unfortunately, our man Musashi is not here today, but it would be nice to talk about what the Redguard opinion of Talos was, because I think they kind of didn't have one.
Yeah.
Hey guys, look at that weird shit that's happening to the east.
Yeah. Well,
Let's
those
stay out
guys,
of
that's
that.
fucked up. I'm glad I'm not in that.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had like a. I mean, he was technically ruling over Hammerfell during the events of Redguard, the video game. But I don't think it was like, it was kind of like when people and by people I mean me, when I like to when I like to draw parallels between Tiber Septim and the first emperor of the Qin dynasty. Qin dynasty or whatever. I like to I think that it's a fair comparison, because the first emperor of the Qin dynasty, when he was managing, in air quotes, seriously big air quotes, when he was managing the entire empire, he didn't really have anything to do with anybody. I mean, it was very hands off. I mean, he had to delegate. You have to delegate when you're talking about a landmass that gigantic.
The mountains are high and the emperor is far away.
Yeah, exactly. And so Tiber Septim's influence on Hammerfell would be felt by the average Joe in Hammerfell in the form of, we're not allowed to trade olives with,
Somerset.
Yeah, Somerset Isles or something
Alador.
or we're not allowed to import mead from Skyrim anymore because there's a tariff, because the Emperor Cheeto decided that we're not gonna that there's a tariff on that stuff. And then but other than that, you would barely feel any kind of like influence of from Talos, other than
a new face on the money.
Yeah, actually, that's right, because that's when they instituted the septum, right?
Yeah.
So so it would have been, you have to go and take all your gold or whatever and turn it in and trade it in, or else you can't do business, and you've got imperial. So the way that they would enforce new monetary units in the real world is literally by military strength. You would have garrisons there, and they would go door to door, and if they found you trading in whatever money that was the old type, they'd be like, you have to go and convert that shit to septums now. And if they catch people, and so there would be inspectors and tax collectors, and if you didn't have septums, your acid, gets strung up. So of course, and I think in Daggerfall, in Redguard, if I recall correctly, there are Imperial troops in Stros Mackay. I don't think I'm wrong about that, right?
Yes, there
Yeah.
are.
Okay.
They're under the command of Amiel Richten, who's the governor.
Yeah.
Yep. And if we're talking Hammerfell specifically, Tiber only actually conquered the place because he allied with the Forebears in the first place. There was there is the sympathetic and grateful faction in Hammerfell to get along with, in a way that there isn't in some of the other provinces. So how they're felt about, how Talos is felt about in Hammerfell could possibly be down to that, and depending on where you are in Hammerfell, the crowns really wouldn't be that open to it. I mean, they've got an alliance between the crowns and the Forebears in the Fourth Era, but I don't think the crowns would be particularly open to the idea of Talos, which is just he was an idiot who got us conquered, and wouldn't be that concerned. But the Forebears would be very much grateful to them, at least. But
Crown gang.
but there's also, I think, the more recent history would be an issue there, and the associations with the Empire, because there was however many legions that just got left in Hammerfell to carry on fighting the Dominion, that deserted so they could unofficially keep fighting the Dominion. So the representations of the Empire are going to be a little bit warped by that, I think, more than perceptions of Talos. Unless Talos gets recast as some kind of mix between what we understand as Talos and the Hunding, I could see him being some sort of resistance god, And then again, going back to what Shazar is, the god of all human undertaking, that all goes together into a very, very nice bundle.
Yeah, that's actually like drawing comparisons between Shazar and the Hunding. That's not really a good idea. I mean, Shazar's got a representation in the Red Guard pantheon, and he's not a good guy.
No.
And that's one of the but it's very hard to not draw comparisons between the two of them because they sort of represent the kind of the same shit. This sort of act of rebellion. The Hunding, however, is not necessarily an entity of rebellion, which, I mean, even though he's used in Daggerfall in Redguard as an agent of change, that's not really necessarily his sphere. It's just more of an unstoppable kind of mule-headedness. Really, it's stubbornness. It's
make way.
Yeah, it's the god of make way. It's the god of move, bitch, get out the way. And that's kind of the point of the Hunding is it's not necessarily, we're rebels and we're going to get what we want and we want change and we want rights and freedom and blah blah blah. The Hunding is just is the god of don't you fuck with me. It's not really yeah, I mean, the guy. It could be used on both sides. For example, I mean, you could have somebody who's and in that respect, like. So I mean, a lot of people are speculating like, how are they going to describe the role of the Dragonborn in Elder Scrolls 6? Like what's the what happened to my character and stuff. It's sort of like when you play Oblivion for the first time after playing Morrowind and they're just like, oh, the Nevermarine fucked off to Akavir, or so they say, or whatever. And it's like, so, and I don't know about you guys, but my first response was, why the fuck would I go to Akavir? Like, that place sucks. There's snakes everywhere. Jesus Christ. And that's kind of like that's kind of the like when you're playing in Skyrim, you keep kind of wondering, like, what are they going to say about your characters from the previous games? And they don't really, because it's been like 400 fucking years. And
200.
200, excuse me, yeah. And it's been about 200 damn years, and people have moved the fuck on, and I suspect that probably we're going to get very much the same thing in Hammerfell. If in Elder Scrolls 6, I don't think that there's going to be that much of a discussion about what the Dragonborn did, because
he got ate by Hermaeus Mora.
Oh,
At the end of the Dragonborn DLC.
I don't think they're even going to get that specific. I mean, they didn't mention anything about the champion of Cyrodiil being the head of the Thieves Guild. They only sort of kind of winked and nodded about Sheogorath, yeah. But that was just a wink and a nod. That still was, you could still absolutely interpret that as being Sheogorath was there at the time,
Yeah.
So I don't know.
I would enjoy just for the sheer comedy of it if they portrayed the Dragonborn exactly how we all end up eventually playing the Dragonborn.
A murder hobo? Or...
As the drunk, all-powerful murder hobo.
Yeah.
God damn it.
Who is also somehow a stealth archer.
Yeah, also somehow head of the Thieves Guild,
No,
head of
he
the
wasn't a
Mages
stealth
Guild,
archer because stealth...
and also a stealth archer.
He's so stealthy, nobody ever saw him fire a single shot. His enemies just suffered sudden arrows to the neck.
Must have been the wind. Yeah, and that's like I don't I think that's a shame, because one of the things that I've always vociferously objected to about the plot line to Skyrim is that we were sort of mantling Hilti, mantling Ysmir. And we didn't really take a mythological trip at all. I mean, it was very sort of... There wasn't a whole lot of... There wasn't even, like, Campbell in it. I mean, it wasn't, like... I mean, you can... I don't know.
We went to Sovngarde.
Yeah, we went to Sovngarde, and that's where we defeated the bad guy. Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, you're supposed to go to sovereign. You're supposed to die and then bring back knowledge. That's how it's supposed to work. We didn't do that. I don't know.
Dawn Guard?
What's up?
That's a DLC. That's not main
Yeah,
quest.
I know, but
Dawn Guard.
I'm trying to reach because of the manipulation with souls in there. But anyway, because you have to either be a vampire or have half a soul to get into the soul can. But yeah, again, DLC. It's not the main quest by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, exactly what role Talos is going to play in the Elder Scrolls 6. If we're
Hey, remember that god we obliterated?
yeah.
Well, I mean, we here the role that he plays in Skyrim is of the god that we're all not allowed to talk about. And when you find a shrine to him, you almost always get like ambushed by Thalmor, and there's a number of plot lines that are related directly to, Nords being upset that they can't worship Talos anymore. So it is definitely a catalyzing agent, but it's not like in the overarching plot of the Thalmor in Skyrim. That's not why they're there to help squash out Talos worship, but it's pretty obvious they're there for a lot more than that, and they're there as like an occupying force to not just to enforce the White Gold Concordat, because I mean the Empire could do that. Why isn't the Empire there stopping Talos worship? It's because the Empire doesn't. That's not really. The Thalmor, I mean, the Empire could have told the Thalmor, we'll go and handle Skyrim. The Thalmor would have been like, no, motherfuckers, you guys do something else. We'll go there and enforce and that's what was happening. The Empire was trying to stop all the rebellion from happening, but the Thalmor were there specifically to stop the worship of Talos. And, the two were related, but they were being handled by two completely different organizations. And that's very it's very revealing that the Thalmor were there specifically for that. So what role are the Thalmor going to have in Elder Scrolls 6? If in Hammerfell they're not worshiping Talos in Hammerfell, so are we going to see any of them?
Well, no, because the Thalmor didn't conquer Hammerfell.
But they're still fighting them though, aren't they?
Yeah.
So they should be there as an enemy force and as conquerors potentially.
They're going to try to invade. They're going to be going for the tower, the Adamantine Tower through Hammerfell, probably.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So what role are they going to play? Cannon fodder.
Well, I sort of figure
to get
from a
elven
narrative
metal
point of view, they will put whatever side that, unless for some reason you can join the Thalmor, that'd be kind of interesting. But they're
that would be neat.
I figure that they'll.
That.
I would actually love that too, but I figured
Hi, I'm an Argonian. I'd like to join the Thalmor.
Seems legit.
Yeah.
Immediately put to death. Game over.
But I figure that they will put whatever factions that they think that they want the protagonist to join in the underdog position against the Thalmor, just because that is more appealing, I would imagine, to most players narratively speaking. So I imagine that we'll see the Thalmor in a very strong conquering position, but I could be completely wrong, of course.
It's an interesting idea. So, I think we've hit all the beats that I wanted to hit.
Talos as virus.
Tal OS.
Yeah.
Well, the Talos thing, I'm honestly kind of the opinion that it was just clever wordplay.
Yeah. It kind of ties into the if he's supporting the world again, then he's just the system on which the Mundus is running because he's supporting the Mundus.
Well,
that was what I took.
Yeah, and it's also important to remember that it's a system running on Sphinx moth trees, so it's a memory retrieval program. It's a yeah. So Yeah. So okay. So everybody, real quick about Tal OS. Everybody understands what the Dream Sleeve is, right? It's a method of communication along the Dream Sleeve that mages, by and large, mages use to recall. Yeah, it's magic internet. So instead of sending emails, you're sending memories. You're sending thoughts, right? That's what memospores are. They're little
using souls as encryption.
Yeah, they're little spores of and Shor's algorithm is in there. That's exactly right. Well, Shor's algorithm is everywhere. That's my favorite little math joke in Elder Scrolls. Is Shor's algorithm is what enables signal processing and the what do you call it? The division of extracting one waveform of data out of a more complex waveform.
Fourier transform.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to come up with that word. It's what enables the process called a Fourier transform. Fourier transforms are what's used to. This all comes from the state gradient echo of Mundus Centrex, that line from the love letter, where the state gradient echo is an MRI technique to extract a layer of information out of a four-dimensional data set, which is what you pull out of a MRI machine. And a state gradient echo uses Fourier transforms, which are enabled. But so subgradiency in the Elder Scrolls universe involves Fourier transforms. Therefore, subgradiency and the existence of Mundus is made possible by the Shor's algorithm. So, yeah, there you go. And at this point, I take a little bow. Thank you. So
nerd has been achieved.
Yes. So when I've successfully nerded. So when you have so in the Dream Sleeve. What you do is you send out a dream or a thought that you've had and you turn it into a memospore, and then another mage is able to pull it in by recalling a certain pattern of thoughts or memories or ideas or emotions or something like that, and that's the decryption. And so you're pulling it in out of the sort of bandwidth of internet that is the Dream Sleeve, the movement of souls, basically.
I wonder what the ping is like.
Oh, it's abhorrent, I would expect. Absolutely awful. So Sphinx Moth Inquiry trees are the equivalent of Google for the Dream Sleeve, and what these mages were doing was sending data back and forth, sending ideas back and forth, and Tal OS is the I guess Kirkbride referred to it as an operating system, but that doesn't really convert well into the idea of dreams and thoughts and emails, basically communications. So I kind of think of it as more like a combination of an application and a protocol. So you can kind of think of like TalOS as a little bit like a web browser. It uses HTTP, and it's it's not necessarily an operating system, but it is an application, right? Thalmor it's a little bit like Firefox versus Chrome is basically what I'm trying to get down to.
Hence, Thalm OR for someone who hasn't seen it written down.
Yeah, Thalm OR and Tal OS are the two sort of like competing technologies that are getting batted back and forth. And then you've got like they're like the Firefox and the Google Chrome, and then you've got Internet Explorer, which I guess in this case is
HIST.
Yeah, the HIST. Just a small group of people are really fanatical about it, but if you ask them about it, they're like, "Well, we have to use it." It's like Internet Explorer 11 at like government offices. You have to use IE 11 because they haven't upgraded to Windows 10 yet. So,
although they should, because they ended support Windows 7.
Well, Windows 7 is not supported anymore, exactly. So which is a shame because that OS is fantastic. So Yeah, can you play Doom in TalOS? That's my fucking question. Will it run Quake? Will it run Quake? That's all I want to know.
I
The
mean,
hist is Tim Talk from China.
the Talos version of Doom is probably just murdering shitloads of Thalmor.
Yeah, it's the what do you call it? The first person shooters are always what is it? It's what's his name? Pellinal. Yeah.
It's people retaking the battle spire. That's what it is. Instead of Phobos and Deimos, you're retaking the battle spire for the Third Empire.
Yeah, exactly. It's sure. Okay. But there's a YouTube video. You guys know the one. Go watch it. It's actually fucking amazing. it's really, really good. Unbelievably excellent. Emergency attain Shim.
My wife did not appreciate me screaming Raymond for an entire week after watching that video.
Oh.
For the rest of you, this is Pellinal the Opera.
Yeah, Pellinal the Opera. Yeah. Go look it up on YouTube. It's freaking amazing. I'm gonna after we get off, I'm gonna try to get YouTube to accept posting the Mara cast after this.
But yeah. Is there anything else we need to cover in terms of Talos?
I don't think so.
Talos plus certificate.
Yeah.
I'm a Talos certified front end developer.
One of the things that I did think of as a kind of question, it's like there was the question of, well, the three souls becoming Talos is kind of the given for how most people will think about it now. But at what point did that merging have to precisely happen? Because I've heard some people say that it was that the way that it was with the Mantella, there was some intentional, is this Zuranarx's soul, is this Tiber Septim's soul, whose is it in the Mantella? And so was there some process of merging that happened beforehand, or literally was it literally just the warp in the west? But why, if it was the warp in the west, would everything be bound up so concretely? Because if we're taking the heresy account as written, Hjalti isn't involved in the main bit of soul transference there at all. So I have difficulty linking the three together on the level that everyone.
There's honestly a lot of gray area there. Skeleton Man's interview actually seems to suggest it's Zurin and Tiber that merge, while the heresies seem to suggest that it's Zurin and Wolfhearth that merge.
Yeah.
It's definitely all over the place.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how would Zurin and Hjalti have merged? That's my question. I know that's the way that Skeleton Man's interview puts it. That Tiber Septim is the enantiomorph of the two, of Talos and Zurin. Are the words that are used. But I still don't get how that could have happened unless it's something to do with the coronation and the association with the Emperor of Tamriel as a mythical thing.
On a really boring physical level, the totem of Tiber Septim is what allowed the use of Mantella at all, and for that to be confined to only certain people could use it, it probably had something like an Akaviri blood seal on it, and blood carries a lot of soul energy, so there might be a juxtaposition there. And then metaphysically, there's also a motif of Zurin kind of supposedly maybe even being possessed by the spirit of Magnus. There's a divine marriage bit going on that people in the setting might be reading into.
Yeah, because as you say, Zurin is heavily associated with Magnus in certain circles, so that's not beyond the realms of possibility.
Not only that, man, in Arena, you'll like this. In Arena, the quest to get the Staff of Magnus, the information you get from it, the backstory behind like how it went missing, was that Magnus ordered the blades to hide it. So it kind of seems to imply that, someone on the up and up in the top brass at White Gold would have been able to do that, and Zurin obviously is probably the best fit So
Yeah, that works.
yeah.
Mm.
Such a mess. The whole thing was just.
Yeah, this is why it's so surprising that the heresy has taken such a hold that it has, because there are bits of it that don't really connect up at all, and the system and how the three combine
Mhm.
is now taken so much as read. I think it's just the way that hyper reality has worked, that people are removing it from the actual text and just associating the theory crafting directly with the text, and the theory crafting has overwritten what the heresy actually was. And as much as I know that Kirkbride said he wanted to rewrite the heresy as something else, I don't know exactly what his prime intentions were with that. I can't honestly remember Return False if that was Kirkbride. I don't think that's ever been stated either way.
He was going to do a thing on IRC. He was going to do a LARP. He was going to invite everybody down. He was going to invite a bunch of people down to New Orleans, and we were going to do a LARP and try to role play or it was either that, or we were going to do it over video, voiceover, video or IP, and then we all had to wear masks. I still have mine.
Yeah, and
yeah, the heresy is kind of a weird one like that. You know.
Yeah. For the record, Chris has found his mask.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Is there anything to get into the sword meeting, Arctic Dew? John, I know you were looking into that recently.
Okay, that depends, because this is going to be a lot more about Tyrus Septim, a lot less about Talos.
Yeah.
I can talk about it.
We did mention the sword meeting in the actual Tiber Septim cast.
Because the sword meeting with Tiber Septim is the biggest piece of evidence for Tiber being a vampire.
Yeah. Well, and I would really, really appreciate if you would talk more about that, because it's freaking great.
Okay, go for it.
Yep.
All right. Oh, jeez.
Yep.
Y'all ready for some heresy?
Oh, yeah.
Let me
Yes.
pull up the... I actually have it saved, but I wasn't expecting this.
Yeah, no, you post that up just slightly before this cast, and you don't expect to talk about it. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, we're gonna.
You're right. That was
Yeah.
extremely foolish of me, to be honest. I think this. Nope. Right, a little bit. There it is. There it is. All right.
Yep.
So, the important bits in the actual sword meeting. Let's see. You got the bit where he's talking to Ball. And then right after that, he's talking to whoever Cyrus's freaking first mate is. Tobias? Maybe?
Yes.
I don't know. And it says, the Emperor looked over and frowned. One's illusion is usually more discreet. Tiber Septim dismounted, but no one saw. The next moment, he was simply crawling up in the new cold colors to his prey. A strange beast movement now. And an Auroch ate a man. It's simple to step aside all that. Just don't have any illusions. We don't. Do we, Captain Tobias? And the bit about him talking to Ball, and then he's all of a sudden painting these cold colors and moving like a beast, is very vampire-like. And the interesting thing, maybe I can put it up in the chat, but if you got his depiction in the first pocket guide to the Empire, you have his depiction and profile. And if you actually compare that to, say, for example, the new Legends card that dropped that features him, titled "A New Era," he's around the time that the transition to the Third Era would have begun. He would have been close to 70 years old, and he looks remarkably like his picture from 30 years before in the pocket guide. And not only that, how he probably would have learned to be. And that, of course, this is all speculation, but how he probably would have learned to be a ruling king, or learned any understanding of metaphysics in the first place, is probably when he visited Morrowind and talked to Vivek. and it's very possible that he decided he wanted to get hands-on and do what Vivek did, and decide to bite off a secret from the King of Rape as well, work with him for a little while. That's kind of just the that's more or less the main footnotes of my big conspiracy theory.
Well,
about
the
that.
unfinished. I mean, of course, the sword meeting is unfinished.
Yep.
But the implication that Kirkbride had that he wanted to make was that Tiber Septim had sold out all of the Empire for Molag Bal for the secret of eternal life. And so that was going to be part of the suggestion of why they were having the sword meeting in the first place, was because Tiber Septim had done this horrible thing, and that he was basically getting old and desperate to live longer, and so he basically institutes Molag Bal worship in the Empire as a trade to Molag Bal for eternal life. Now, we all know how Molag Bal manages eternal life.
Yeah.
So yeah, the idea that I think you're picking up on the little pieces that Kirkbride was throwing in there to suggest that, to drop hints that later on in the story he would eventually spell out roughly that that Tiber Septim had basically sold his soul to Molag Bal, and that Molag Bal was sort of in control of the Empire at the time. And then one of the reasons why the sword meeting is as fractured as it is because of the dragon break that happens during the fight between him and Cyrus the Restless, during which Cyrus the Restless apparently channels or becomes one of the barons of move like this, and it takes on sort of what you might call a Dragon Ball Z levels of crazy.
Okay, yeah, I dig it.
During which they actually end up fighting in outer space, and he was going to drop a name drop where Tiber Septim hurls the space station from the Secunda mod. He throws the space station at Cyrus the Restless, and so yeah, over 9,000 levels of crazy. Yeah.
And there you get the whole genre stretching that Kirkbride tried to do in the later years, and just how many different types of thing can we apply the Elder Scrolls to?
Right, exactly.
Which is fun.
Yeah, how crazy can we
this
get?
Technically makes Tiber Septim the most likely patriarch for the Cyrodiil Vampire Order.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, and possibly a way to extend his power out beyond his retirement, because 102 is, as it said in the Heresy, is still pretty old.
Pretty old.
But he's got to die at some point if it's to remain remotely credible, unless he's prepared to step into the whole living god role, which he doesn't, bizarrely enough. So he's got to have some way of maintaining his power and being able to pull any strings, which is, it's a little interesting actually, given the Underking. Now I think about it, because the Underking was basically spending a lot of his time before the events of Daggerfall mucking around with secret societies and contesting anything that was anti-Empire, and I mean most particularly the Order of the Black Worm and Manamako. But was he also trying to disrupt the influence of Hjalti, should we say, for the purposes of argument, through the Vampiric Order? Was that the primary goal, to stop his influence there? Because Zurin and Hjalti had quite a serious falling out about how to run the Empire at some point, over quite who should be suppressed, who shouldn't, and how it should be managed. So that the image of that sort of a shadow war it appeals to me. But
And
I'm not sure how much there actually is out there to support that.
Could be an additional reason for why the Elder Council assassinated his son, Pelagius the First, too. But at some point, Tiber actually starts aging again. At least you go by real Baron Zaya. Later on in his years, but it's like I did the math. He's like 90 at the time. I never thought about this. This gives a creepy connotation. When Tiber theoretically was banging Baron Zaya, he would have been like a 90-year-old man.
Yeah.
And she'd be like a maybe like an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, like dark elf chick. Like, okay, but the description of him is that he was somewhere in between 40 to 60 years old in appearance, which is kind of a weirdly wide range, but
well, you'd figure. I mean, he's the emperor of man.
hair.
I mean, if anybody's going to be able to get some of that spice, it's going to be him. There's your Dune reference.
If we're going to take the vampire theory a little further, how does not feeding affect the cyrodiilic strain of vampires according to Immortal Blood?
They look more monstrous.
Okay, is it just hasn't fed in a few days or something? Just the effects of it, would that mimic the effects of aging enough? I mean, that could be one explanation for the apparent age change in the real Baron Zaya.
Yeah, that could be it. I just sort of figured he ended his pack with Ball because he'd gotten what he wanted, but I don't know.
Vampirism isn't really that sort of a contract, though.
Sure, but there's ways to cure it. I don't know.
Yeah, there are. Yeah.
I mean, the Count of Skingrad knows a way, and he's kind of higher up.
Yeah. Yeah. Ooh.
A redneck in the woods in the swamps of Morthal can cure vampirism. I'm sure Tiber Septim can figure out.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
That's a red guard in the wilds of Morthal. But anyway, but yeah, Arctic Jews made a decent point. Or not Arctic Jews, sorry, Bacca Awful. The Morrowind's main crest. What do we make of Wolf?
Yeah.
Well, he's great evidence that Wolfhearth is part of Talos, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that was pretty much supposed to be a Talos, like, incarnate, or an illusion of some kind.
Yep.
Created by Talos.
Yeah.
I think that's who that was supposed to be, but it's... Yeah. I mean, why was he there? I mean, it was there to sort of, like, give you a little, like, wink and a nod towards the next game.
Okay. Yeah, as opposed to the personification of Mara, who is just there to be got off her pillar or whatever it was, got out of her cave. Oh no! Sorry, that implication is too bad. You, during the Imperial Cult quest, you helped Mara come out of the closet. Anyway.
Oh.
No.
No.
Yeah. But thinking about the kind of the Avatar of Talos stuff, is there anything that we can draw from that in terms of, because you said incarnation there. I don't know whether that's a bit too strong a word.
No, I didn't. I shouldn't have said incarnation.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry, that was what I was thinking. My mind immediately then leapt to the whole mantling and incarnation of separate roads, blah blah blah. But Wolf is an appearance more than anything else. He's not anything that we can tie to as necessarily being mortal at all, and because he's just there, and then all of a sudden he's not. We know nothing else about him, unfortunately.
I mean, I think you can just kill him and loot his corpse, though. So he's stepped into flesh on some level.
That's true. You can.
He has a lot of moon sugar on him too, which.
Ooh.
I've been pondering that for a few days.
Well, I mean, if he's in some way a Shezarene, then he would be associated with the moon.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not moon sugar. Maybe that's just dust from the moon.
But Shezarenes aren't incarnations of deities. They are. Well, they're. Okay, no, that doesn't work. They kind of are, but they're not appearance. They're not necessarily. Yes, they are appearances of, because Palinol, but I'm trying to find a way of saying this but I'm arguing against myself all the way through. I'm sorry.
Ah.
Yeah, but if Wolf is a Shezarine, that has some implications for things like for the others as well, because because Wolf came into existence seemingly to just be around to talk to the Nerevarine. So were the other component parts of Talos just there to fulfill their role?
Well, I don't think.
Yeah.
I don't think that
Welcome
having
to
several
the second
Shezarines
half
in
of
one
that
place.
of this cast. If you
Yeah,
have that.
I don't think having several Shezarines in one place necessarily means that they're all going to be like working together. I think if anything,
Yep.
it almost guarantees that they're not, because of who they're incarnated by. I mean, this was one of the primordial gods of chaos. They're all going to be doing their own thing. So,
yep.
I don't think that really has anything to do with anything.
Okay.
I think, or well, rather, it has everything to do with everything, but I don't think it has anything to do with their motivation.
Yep. Now, because if you then look at Akatosh and Alduin, who are, if you're going to go by that sort of thing, shards of the Akatusk or similar, which we actually now have backing for, thanks to ASO elsewhere, there's actually something that strongly implies Akka above all of the time gods that we know. But just thinking Akatosh and Alduin don't get on. So, yeah, I absolutely see that you might have Shezarines trying to do entirely different things.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think Shezarines just have big chunks of the Lorcan soul, and incarnations are the actual god just popping in. I usually go by the Prophet from Oblivion and Wolf as my model for like that kind of thing, because the Prophet does the same exact thing, and he also gives you the blessing of Talos.
Yeah.
And then when his role is done, he's gone.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah. I like that. Sure. Same sort of, yeah. The same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a good point to wrap this up, I
I
think.
think so. Yeah.
We're doing Xanathar next.
Yep.
Yes.
And then we're done with the divines.
And then we got to and like I said, then I want to start kind of going back onto the big hits from like ages ago. I want to start talking about. We're going to start doing really, really heavy shit.
Oh.
And
Right.
yeah.
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Daddy got a
boy.
Christmas gift. So we're gonna start doing the heavy shit, and then when we're gonna go back and revisit the unreliable narrator and some other things, because we've all been learning so much during these lore casts that I kind of feel like we need to go back and revisit them. Also, they were really quick casts back then.
Yep.
We didn't get a chance to really cover them as much as we do now, or we're doing like 1.5 hour long casts that, I mean, we really beat the snot out of a subject. So yeah, you got the cards for Christmas? Oh yeah, Doc. I'm trying to find the large format cards. They're like how big? I'm trying to get those because the art's really good, but I don't need them. So I'm just gonna probably find the small format. And honestly, I don't need those either. So fuck it. Yeah, but okay. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you hopefully in 2 weeks, provided another fucking site doesn't decide to go live. All right. Yeah. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bye.
Later.
Fare thee well.
Yep.